The night was cold and clear when I pulled out of the convenience store parking lot on the edge of a small town in northern Pennsylvania. It was just after midnight, and the roads were nearly deserted except for me. I had a little under 2 hours to drive home to Pittsburgh, taking the old back road highway instead of the interstate, just because I liked the quiet and the scenery at night, the way the moonlight played on the trees and the empty stretches of pavement. The road wound through dense woods, and the only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the dark like twin blades. I kept the radio low, playing a playlist of soft rock to keep me awake on the long drive. I'd driven this route a dozen times before, usually at this hour, but tonight something felt different. The air had an almost electric quality to it, the kind you feel right before a storm, though the forecast had said clear skies all night. I shrugged it off and focused on the road. About 40 minutes in, as I crossed over a narrow wooden bridge spanning a shallow creek, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road up ahead. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker. He was a tall man, wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his face. But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring down the road. I slowed down, curious but cautious. The road was narrow here, with barely enough shoulder to pull over. I debated stopping, but decided against it. Something about the stillness unsettled me. As I passed, the man didn't move or even turn his head. The headlights briefly illuminated his face, and I caught a glimpse. Pale, gaunt, almost ghostly. His eyes were wide and unblinking. The moment I was alongside him, he disappeared. I slammed on the brakes, swerving slightly onto the shoulder. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. I looked all around, but the man was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere, no footprints in the gravel, no rustling in the bushes. I shook my head, trying to calm myself, telling myself it had to be a trick of the light or exhaustion playing tricks on me. I got back on the road and pushed the gas pedal down, eager to get past whatever that was. A few miles later, the radio suddenly went static. The music cut out abruptly, replaced by a low, crackling hiss. I reached over to turn it off, but the static seemed to grow louder, and through the noise I heard a faint whisper. "Don't stop." I froze. The whisper was soft but urgent. I looked around, trying to figure out if it was coming from the radio or somewhere else. The car was otherwise silent, and the whisper seemed to echo from the trees lining the road. I turned the radio off, but the whisper continued for several seconds before fading into silence. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I told myself it was just static, maybe my imagination. I needed to get home. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the trees, shadows shifting just beyond the reach of the headlights. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw headlights behind me, but when I turned to look, the road was empty. I told myself to focus on driving and not to look back. The road began to narrow, winding through thick forest with branches scraping the roof of my car. The moon was high now, casting silvery light through the leaves. I passed a rusty old sign that said Dead Man's Curve, a notorious spot where several accidents had happened over the years. My grip tightened on the wheel as I approached the sharp bend. As I rounded the curve, I caught sight of a car wreck up ahead. Twisted metal, shattered glass, and flames licking the night air. It looked fresh. I slammed on the brakes and pulled onto the shoulder. I stepped out cautiously, heart pounding, and saw no one around. The fire flickered, casting strange shadows. Suddenly, I heard a soft sobbing nearby. I spun around, looking for the source. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was a woman in a white dress, stained with dirt and blood. Her hair was matted, and her eyes were wide with fear. She took a step toward me, then stopped. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I backed away slowly. The whispering started again, louder this time. "Don't stop! Don't stop!" I jumped back into my car, locked the doors, and slammed my foot on the accelerator. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The woman was gone. The flames had died down. The wreck was gone. The road ahead stretched empty and dark. I didn't stop again until I reached my driveway, safe under the streetlights of my neighborhood. I never told anyone about that night, afraid they'd think I was crazy. But sometimes, when I drive late at night, I feel eyes watching me from the trees, and I hear whispers on the wind. Don't stop. Story the end. The road stretched out before me like a ribbon of black silk, barely visible under the flickering amber streetlights that lined the highway's edge. It was just after midnight, and the only sound inside my car was the steady hum of the engine and the soft scratch of my tires on the wet asphalt. The rain had stopped a few minutes ago, leaving the air thick with dampness and the faint smell of wet earth. I'd been driving for hours, making my way from my family's cabin deep in the Appalachian foothills back toward my apartment in Charlotte. The trip should have been uneventful, just a simple 6-hour drive down Route 321, a well-traveled road that cuts through the small towns and rolling hills of western North Carolina. But tonight, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour into the drive, I passed through a small town called Mars Hill. The place was quiet, all the storefronts shuttered and dark except for a single gas station glowing at the corner of Main and Broad. I remembered filling up there on the way up, but I hadn't thought much of it until now. As I rolled past the station, I caught sight of a man standing outside under the flickering neon sign. He was wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up, hands shoved deep into his pockets, face obscured in shadow. Something about his posture was strange. He wasn't looking around or toward the road, just stood perfectly still, as if he were waiting for something. I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw his head turn toward me, but when I looked again, he was motionless. I pressed my foot a little harder on the gas and kept going. The highway curved into a stretch of thick forest. Trees leaned in on both sides like silent sentinels, branches scratching at the night sky. The moon was hidden behind clouds, so there was no natural light to cut through the darkness. My headlights carved a narrow path ahead, but the shadows beyond seemed to shift and dance just out of reach. The road sign warned of a sharp turn up ahead, but I barely noticed it. My heart was beating fast, pounding in my chest, and my palms were slick against the steering wheel. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. Driving alone at night always makes your imagination run wild. Then the headlights appeared. At first, I thought it was just another car coming the other way, but the headlights weren't arranged the way they should be. Instead of two beams, there was a single bright light, glowing and pulsating like a giant eye in the distance. I squinted, gripping the wheel tighter. The light grew closer, but it didn't move like a car. It floated. The road beneath it was empty. Then the light dimmed, flickered, and suddenly vanished. I blinked hard, wondering if I'd just imagined the whole thing. The radio, which had been silent, burst to life with static and faint whispers that I couldn't quite make out. I slammed the power button, but the whispers turned into low laughter that echoed inside the cab. I yanked the wheel to the right, veering onto the gravel shoulder, heart racing. That's when I saw her. Standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the rain-slick darkness, was a woman in a white dress, soaked and dirty, her hair plastered to her face. She wasn't moving, just staring straight ahead. I froze. For a moment, the only sound was the soft patter of rain beginning again. Then she turned. Her eyes were empty black pits that seemed to suck the light right out of my headlights. I slammed the truck into reverse and spun back onto the highway. The radio crackled again, louder this time, and the voice whispered clearly, "Don't look back." My foot slammed on the gas, tires spinning on wet gravel. The highway blurred past as I sped forward, the rain coming down hard now. Every shadow at the edge of the woods seemed alive, reaching out. A figure appeared directly in the road, a child, pale and dripping wet, eyes too old and hollow. I swerved violently to avoid hitting it, the truck skidding on the slick asphalt. When I looked back, the child was gone. The road ahead twisted sharply, and I lost control, sliding into a shallow ditch. The truck stopped with a jolt. My heart was racing. My hands trembled as I tried to start the engine. Nothing. My phone was dead. No signal. No power. The rain was relentless now, drumming on the roof like 1,000 fingers. I sat there, trapped, listening. A soft tapping began at the passenger window. I turned slowly. No one was there. The tapping continued. A cold breath whispered on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the seat was empty. The tapping stopped. I tried the engine again. It roared to life. Without thinking, I slammed the truck into gear and tore back onto the highway. The rain began to ease, and the trees thinned. Finally, the clouds broke and the moonlight spilled over the empty road. I drove straight through the night, never once slowing until the familiar glow of my apartment lights came into view. When I finally pulled into my driveway, soaked and exhausted, I noticed a wet handprint on the passenger side window. I never saw anyone get in the truck, but sometimes when I drive late at night, I swear I feel a presence beside me, a whisper in the dark telling me not to look back. Story, the end. The summer I turned 24, I took a road trip that forever changed how I viewed driving at night, especially alone on a lonely stretch of highway in West Texas. It was the kind of trip born out of spontaneity, the desire to escape, and the kind of regret you carry with you afterward. I had been working in Dallas for a few months after college, a desk job that drained me more than I expected. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly grueling week, I threw a few things in my old Honda Civic and decided to head west toward the mountains of New Mexico and Arizona. No plans, no set route, just a tank full of gas and a playlist loaded with road trip classics. My first night on the road was uneventful. I stopped at a cheap motel just outside El Paso, ate a burrito at a Greasy Spoon, and went to bed early. The next day, I pushed on through New Mexico, enjoying the quiet vastness of the desert during the daylight hours. But that night, it was different. I was driving from Santa Rosa to Albuquerque around 11 p.m., somewhere along I-40, and the road stretched before me like a ribbon of darkness, swallowed by a moonless sky. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional flicker of a distant oil rig or a passing billboard. About 20 miles outside of town, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Another car coming up behind me fast. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing 75 miles per hour. The other car was gaining. I moved over a bit, expecting it to pass, but it stayed behind me, tailgating too closely to be comfortable. I slowed down to 65 miles per hour. It slowed too, perfectly matching my pace. The car didn't flash its high beams, didn't try to pass. It just stayed there, glued to my rear bumper. My heart started to race. I don't know why, but something felt off. The road was empty, no other cars in sight, and the desert still and silent except for the roar of my engine. I turned on the radio. Static. I tried calling my girlfriend. No signal. I pulled into the next rest stop and parked near a cluster of trees. The other car pulled in behind me, lights dimming but still on. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring in the mirror. The driver's window was rolled down, but I couldn't see anyone inside. Suddenly, the headlights flickered off. Total darkness swallowed the lot. I locked my doors, turned the engine off, and sat frozen. A soft tapping came at my driver's side window. I dared not look. The tapping grew louder, like fingernails scraping. I closed my eyes for a moment, praying this was a nightmare. Then a voice, barely a whisper. "Don't leave." I swallowed hard. The radio crackled back to life, and a chilling voice announced a warning about a crash ahead. I hit the gas, peeling out of the rest stop and back onto the highway. The car followed, headlights back on and brighter than before. I floored it. For miles, I dodged turns and hills, trying to shake the car, but it stayed with me, relentless. Finally, as dawn broke, the car's lights vanished. I drove the rest of the way into Albuquerque with shaking hands. Weeks later, I looked up accident reports for that stretch of I-40. There had been a fatal collision years before involving a car that mysteriously disappeared. I never took that highway at night again. Sometimes when I'm driving alone in the dark, I swear I see headlights in my mirror, waiting. Story the end. The sun had long set by the time Eric hit the road, leaving behind the small town of Marietta, Ohio. He was on his way home from visiting a friend who had recently moved there for work. The drive was supposed to take just under 3 hours, but with the night creeping in and the stretch of rural highway ahead, Eric knew it was going to be a long, solitary ride. His old Honda Accord, a reliable but aging vehicle, hummed steadily as he cruised down Route 50, the only road that connected Marietta to his hometown near Athens. The sky was a blanket of black, broken only by the faint glimmer of stars struggling through patches of clouds. Eric had always found comfort in driving at night. The quiet, the emptiness, the sense that the world had paused, all of it made the miles feel shorter. But tonight, something felt different. The road seemed darker, the woods denser, and the shadows longer. The chill in the air wasn't just from the dropping temperature. It was a feeling deep in his gut, an unease that had begun to settle as he turned onto the less traveled stretch of highway. Eric glanced at his phone. No signal. Typical for this area, but still a bit unnerving. The radio was nothing but static, despite several attempts to find a station. He decided to turn it off and focus on the road, the headlights cutting a narrow path through the trees lining both sides. About an hour into the drive, the road narrowed and wound through a heavily wooded section. The trees grew taller here, their branches interlacing overhead, casting eerie shadows that danced in the truck's beams. It was then that Eric saw it, a figure standing motionless at the side of the road. He slowed down instinctively, eyes searching for signs of distress. It was a woman, thin, wearing what looked like a long white dress. Her hair was long and dark, hanging in front of her face, obscuring her features. She didn't move as his car passed by. She just stood there, staring into the woods. The sight sent a shiver down Eric's spine. He shook his head, telling himself it was just someone out for a walk, maybe a hitchhiker. But something about the stillness unsettled him. The woman looked too still, too unnatural. Minutes later, the engine sputtered and the dashboard lights flickered. Eric's heart jumped. He pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. The car was idling, but the engine sounded off. He popped the hood and checked the battery cables and fluid levels. Nothing seemed out of place. A soft rustling came from the woods nearby. Eric froze, peering into the darkness. Nothing. Just the sound of leaves crunching, carried by a breeze he didn't feel. Closing the hood, he slid back into the driver's seat. The car started fine, and he continued, more cautiously now. The fog began to roll in thickly, reducing visibility to just a few feet. The headlights reflected off the moisture in the air, creating an almost blinding white glow. Eric turned on the fog lights and slowed down. Out of the fog, a shadow suddenly emerged on the road. A man this time, tall, dressed in dark clothes, standing dead center in Eric's path. He slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt mere feet away from the figure, who didn't move. Eric's breath came out in ragged clouds as he sat frozen. The man's head slowly turned, revealing a face pale and gaunt, eyes sunken and hollow. His mouth hung open as if he were silently screaming. Eric's stomach churned, and he fumbled for the gear shift, putting the car in reverse. As he backed away, the man suddenly vanished. Eric's heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. He looked in the rearview mirror, only fog and empty road. He kept driving, but the fog thickened, wrapping around the car like a shroud. Then the radio crackled to life, static, then a whisper. A voice, faint and desperate. "Help me." Eric spun the dial, trying to cut the sound, but the voice persisted. Suddenly, the car's temperature gauge spiked. The inside of the car grew ice cold, his breath fogging in the air. The windows began to frost over. A heavy pounding started on the roof, slow and rhythmic like footsteps. Eric covered his head, terrified. When he dared to look up, nothing was there. He sped up, pushing through the fog as best he could. The pounding stopped. The radio switched channels on its own, cycling through static and eerie voices. Finally, the fog began to lift, and Eric found himself on a familiar stretch of highway near town. He pulled into a gas station, trembling. Outside, a light rain began to fall. The scratches on the side of his car were fresh. Eric never spoke of what happened that night, but every time he drives that road after dark, he feels those hollow eyes watching from the trees, waiting. Story the end. The clock on my dashboard glowed 1:17 a.m. as I pulled out of the empty parking lot of a late-night diner somewhere near rural Arkansas. I had just wrapped up a visit with my cousin, and the plan was simple: get home to Little Rock before sunrise. The weather was clear, a cool breeze drifting through the cracked window. I wasn't especially tired, but the road ahead was long, twisting through patches of dense forest and stretches of open farmland. A quiet 2-lane highway with barely a car in sight. I flipped the radio on low, catching a late-night country station. It was the kind of music that usually made long drives feel a little less lonely. The headlights pierced the darkness ahead, illuminating the cracked pavement and roadside markers fading into the shadows of trees. I'd taken this route plenty of times before, mostly during the day, but at night, everything felt different, heavier somehow. About 30 minutes in, the road narrowed and wound through a thick canopy of pines. The moon was just a sliver, casting almost no light. The only illumination came from my car's beams and the faint glow of a few scattered farmhouses miles away. As I rounded a bend, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror, A set of headlights suddenly appeared, far behind me at first, but gaining fast. It was a black pickup truck, and it was driving way too close. At first, I thought maybe the driver was just impatient, wanting to pass, but as miles ticked by, the truck stayed glued to my bumper, never pulling out, but never backing off. It made my skin crawl. I checked my mirrors constantly, but the driver's face was always hidden behind dark-tinted windows. I considered pulling over to let the truck pass, but the only pullouts were dusty gravel spots barely big enough for one vehicle, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop at all with that truck so close. So I kept driving, trying to stay calm, keeping my speed steady around 55 miles per hour. The truck blinked its high beams once, then twice, a clear warning. I shivered and slowed to 45 miles per hour, hoping to coax it to pass me, but instead, the truck slowed too and stayed right behind me. My heart pounded. I reached for my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Nothing but that mocking "no service" in the corner of the screen. The forest pressing in on both sides of the road felt like a trap. Suddenly, the truck's headlights went out. Total darkness behind me. I flicked my eyes to the mirror, but couldn't see a thing. A sinking dread took hold. I blinked, and when my eyes adjusted, the truck's lights were back on. Only now it was closer. Way too close. So close, I could almost see the shape of a person sitting behind the wheel. But the window tint was so dark, I couldn't make out a face. Then it blinked again. No lights. No truck. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing, and the car screeched to a halt. I sat frozen, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, ears straining in the sudden silence. A long moment passed. Then, headlights appeared, right in front of me. A figure stepped onto the road, a woman soaking wet, wearing a torn white dress. Her long hair clung to her face like seaweed. She looked straight at me with hollow eyes. I couldn't move. She raised a hand, pointing down the road, the direction I'd come from. Then she vanished. The headlights behind me blared suddenly, and I jerked the wheel to the side. My car skidded on gravel as the black pickup truck roared past, speeding away into the darkness. I sat there, breathless. When I finally forced myself to move, I got back on the road and didn't look back until I pulled into my driveway hours later, dawn creeping over the horizon. The next morning, I found wet footprints on my car door and a scrap of white fabric caught in the windshield wipers. I haven't driven that road at night since. Story the end. It was around 11:30 at night when I left the small diner off Route 64, somewhere in western North Carolina. I'd been driving all day from Nashville and still had a couple more hours to go before reaching Durham. I was tired, but not enough to stop. I'd done this sort of trip before, and I figured with a full tank and some coffee, I'd be fine. The road was dark and quiet, lined with thick forests on either side. No billboards, no streetlights, just the hum of my engine and the occasional yellow reflector on the road. I was on a lonely stretch of highway where the trees crowd close and the only light comes from your own headlights. There's a particular kind of silence out there at night. It's not peaceful. It's heavy, oppressive, like the darkness is listening. The first odd thing I noticed was the car behind me. Or rather, the lack of one. There hadn't been another vehicle for over 20 minutes, and in that time I hadn't passed a single exit or town. I knew some stretches of this road were pretty dead, especially late at night, but it felt too empty. Then, without warning, my headlights picked up a figure standing at the edge of the road. It was a man, thin, tall, motionless. He didn't wave. He didn't have a car nearby. He just stood there, staring out toward the road, but not directly at my car. I swerved slightly in surprise and glanced into my rearview mirror. He was gone. I figured I must have imagined it. Maybe it was a shadow, a mailbox, anything. I shook my head, turned up the music, and told myself I was just tired. The coffee hadn't done much, and maybe I should have stopped after all. But I kept going. About 15 minutes later, I saw something again. This time it was clearer. A man, maybe the same one, standing just off the shoulder on the opposite side. He was facing away this time, as if staring into the woods. No movement, just still like a mannequin. I looked back again, and just like before, he wasn't there. I actually laughed to myself. Nerves, caffeine, isolation, it was probably all mixing into some kind of roadside paranoia. Still, I leaned forward in my seat, trying to stay focused. I started to feel cold, despite the heat being on. The heater was blowing, but the air felt wrong. Not cool. just empty, like it wasn't touching me at all. I flipped off the music. That helped a little. I rolled down the window an inch, just enough to hear the outside world, crickets, wind, maybe the rustle of trees. But there was nothing, no sound at all, not even the tires on pavement, just a weird, mute silence. Then my engine sputtered. I checked the gauges. Everything looked fine. The lights flickered, but the car didn't stall. A second later, it smoothed out again. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. I'd had this car for years, and it had never given me issues. I started passing small roads, gravel drives, narrow access paths. Some didn't even have signs. The forest grew denser, and I started feeling like I was being watched, like something was pacing my car from the trees. I told myself not to look. Keep your eyes on the road. But I couldn't help it. I flicked my eyes to the right, just for a second. And I saw a face. Pale, gaunt, pressed up between two trees, just far enough back that the headlights barely caught it. Its eyes were wide open, glowing slightly in the beam, and its mouth hung open like it was screaming, but there was no sound. I looked back at the road, heart hammering. When I glanced back, it was gone. I slowed the car. I didn't stop. No way I was going to stop. But I dropped down to 35. Every bit of me felt tight and alert. My brain was trying to explain it away. Pareidolia, optical illusion, something. But deep down, I knew what I saw. About 5 minutes later, I noticed the road markings looked different. Not newer, older, faded. The reflectors were missing in some spots. I hadn't seen a sign in forever. No mile markers, no county signs, nothing. I pulled out my phone, which I'd left charging in the console. No service, not one bar, just searching. I opened up Google Maps. The GPS dot spun, then froze, stuck in some gray space with no roads drawn around me. I swallowed and looked at the gas gauge again, still above half. I just had to keep going. Eventually, I'd hit another highway or a town or something. That's when I saw the third man. Except this time, he was in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes hard. Tires screeched. I came to a stop just a few feet from him. My headlights washed over his figure, tall, thin, old clothes, face too pale for this time of year. He didn't move. I honked. Nothing. He slowly lifted his head and looked right at me. His eyes were empty, not in the poetic way. Literally empty. Just black holes, sunken and deep. He raised one hand and pointed at me. I threw the car into reverse and backed up fast, heart in my throat. When I shifted into drive to go around him, he was gone. Just vanished. No trace. I didn't stop again after that. But things got worse. Shapes began appearing at the edge of my headlights. They'd vanish when I tried to look at them, like they only existed in the corner of my vision. I started hearing whispers, low and garbled, through the air vents. My mirrors would shift on their own. I adjusted them more than 5 times, but they'd slowly tilt away again. Something knocked on the passenger side window at one point. I didn't look. I refused to look. Then, up ahead, I saw a small wooden bridge. It didn't look familiar, and I'd driven this route before. I slowed down as I approached it. The wood looked wet, rotted. There were no guardrails. I debated turning around, but where would I go? As I crossed it, the headlights flickered again. The engine sputtered a second time. And for just a moment, I felt the car dip, like something was beneath it. Something alive, like I'd driven over a body. I pressed the gas and got over the bridge as fast as I could. Then, finally, a light ahead. I saw a gas station sign. Relief flooded me. I nearly cried. The station was small, old style, no brand name, just service on a faded sign. One pump, one building. But I didn't care. I pulled in fast. As I stepped out, I noticed something was off again. The air didn't feel like air. It felt thick, like I was underwater. Everything was quiet. The lights inside the station flickered weakly, and through the dirty glass, I saw someone standing at the counter. I went in. The bell didn't chime. There was no sound at all. The man behind the counter didn't move. He just stood there, head down, eyes closed. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me, do you know how far I am from Durham?" His head lifted slowly. Eyes opened. Same black, empty holes. He smiled. I backed out without saying another word. I jumped in the car, slammed the door, locked it. When I looked back at the gas station, the lights were off. The whole place was gone. Just darkness and forest. No pump, no building, no man. I floored it. The road behind me disappeared into shadow. I don't know how long I drove. Could have been 10 minutes. Could have been an hour. Time didn't feel real anymore. Everything felt like a dream or a nightmare. The only thing keeping me grounded was the gas gauge, slowly ticking down. Eventually, I saw another light, real this time. A real gas station. Well lit. A few trucks parked outside. I pulled in, skidded to a stop, and ran inside. The smell of coffee, the sound of a cooler buzzing, the overhead music, all of it hit me like salvation. I asked the cashier where I was. He looked at me, confused. "You're in Winston-Salem, man." I'd somehow gone north, not east. I'd been heading to Durham. This was over an hour in the wrong direction. I had no memory of making any turns, no memory of changing roads, nothing. I didn't care. I bought another coffee, filled the tank, and took a different highway all the way to Durham. I didn't stop again until I reached my hotel. I told a few friends about it later. Most said it was probably sleep deprivation, hallucination, nerves. Maybe. But one guy, a friend from college, grew up in North Carolina. He got real quiet when I described the road, the man, the face in the trees. "I think you went down Dead Bend," he said. "What's that?" I asked. "It's a local legend," he told me. Old stretch of road. Supposedly a bunch of people vanished there in the 60s. The state rerouted most of it, but parts are still there, unmarked. They say if you drive it at the wrong time of night, you'll see people who aren't alive. And if you stop, sometimes you don't come back. I didn't believe in ghosts before, but I don't drive at night anymore either. Not alone. Not in the dark. Not on roads I don't know. Story the end. The first time I drove through West Texas at night, I told myself I'd never do it again. The endless blackness. The kind that makes you feel like you're driving through space rather than land. Spooked me. But life has a funny way of making you do the exact things you swear off. I was coming back from El Paso after spending the weekend visiting my sister. She was getting over a rough divorce and asked me to come out and help her pack up the last of her stuff. I stayed longer than I planned, 2 nights instead of 1, and had to get back to San Antonio before morning. I had work and I wasn't in a position to call out again. It was about 10:45 p.m. when I hit I-10 East. My tank was full, and I had snacks and water in the passenger seat, with my phone on a mount playing an old episode of a true crime podcast. The sky was overcast, and there wasn't a moon, which made the road ahead seem like it disappeared just beyond the reach of my headlights. I passed through a few dead-looking towns, Van Horn, Balmorhea, but I didn't stop. I figured I'd make it to Fort Stockton around 1 a.m. and maybe grab a coffee there. That was my plan, anyway. What actually happened, it's still hard to talk about. I first noticed the car a few miles past the turnoff for McCamey. A pair of headlights appeared behind me in the distance, and at first I thought nothing of it. It was a highway. Of course, someone else would be driving it, even that late. But the thing was, the lights stayed back. No matter how long I drove, they kept the same exact distance behind me. Not gaining, not falling back, just hanging there like a shadow. After about 15 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe they had cruise control on just like me. But then I slowed down a bit to see if they'd pass me. They didn't. They slowed down too. That's when I really started to notice the isolation. No cars coming the other way, no lights from gas stations or towns, just the dull yellow glow of my headlights on the 2-lane highway and that damn pair of lights behind me. I turned off the podcast and rolled the window down a bit, hoping some fresh air would calm me. It didn't. I decided I'd pull over at the next rest stop and let the car go by. But there weren't any. Not for miles. Just scrubland and fences and the occasional barbed wire gate leading to God knows where. Then I saw something on the side of the road up ahead, like a turnout. Not a real stop, but a place to pull off. I signaled and eased over, slowing to a full stop. I waited. The car behind me didn't pass. It stopped too. I stared at my rearview mirror, heart beating out of my chest. The headlights stayed on. No one got out. No honk. No motion. Just 2 bright white lights beaming into my mirrors. I sat there frozen for what felt like 5 minutes, but could have been 1. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, no signal. I stared at the mirror again and finally worked up the nerve to open my door, step out, and yell back. "Hey, you all right?" No answer. I took 1 step toward the back of my car. The other car's lights suddenly cut off. That silence, that blackness. I can't explain how much it swallowed me. My own headlights lit up the ground around me, but everything beyond was just thick, inky dark. I ran back to my door and got in, slamming it shut, locking the doors and throwing the car in drive. I peeled out of the turnout and back onto the highway, glancing into the mirror every few seconds. No lights, nothing behind me. I kept checking every minute or so for the next 10 miles. Still nothing. I told myself maybe it was just some drunk idiot messing around. But I couldn't shake that feeling, that cold pit in my stomach, like something had gone very, very wrong. Around 1:15 a.m., I saw a glowing blue gas station sign in the distance. Relief washed over me. I pulled off the highway into a tiny place with one pump and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Still, the lights were on, and there was an old pickup parked out front. I went inside, grabbed a coffee from the pot, it was barely warm, and approached the counter. An older man, maybe late 60s, with deep wrinkles and a weathered ball cap, stood behind it, flipping through a newspaper. "You okay, son?" he asked, looking me up and down. "Yeah, I think so," I said. "There was this car following me, but it disappeared after I stopped." His face changed. "What kind of car?" he asked slowly. "I don't know," I said. "It never passed me, just two headlights, white, stayed behind me for miles." He folded the newspaper and set it down. "You said it stopped when you stopped?" I nodded. "And the lights went out?" "Yeah," I said. "Then it was gone." He didn't speak right away, just stared at me for a few seconds like he was sizing me up. Then he said, "You're lucky." "Lucky?" He nodded. "You've been on this road long enough. You hear stories. Not all of them are just talk." "What kind of stories?" He leaned in a bit. "People seeing cars that ain't there, following them. Sometimes they vanish. Sometimes they don't." I laughed nervously. "You're saying I was followed by a ghost car?" He didn't smile. "I'm saying, whatever it was, you don't want it finding you again." I stood there awkwardly. My coffee was shaking slightly in my hand. I tried to change the subject, but the man just looked past me toward the window. His eyes narrowed. "You drive a black Honda, right?" I turned to look through the glass. There, across the lot, just behind my car, were two headlights, on bright, aimed directly at the store. "I thought you said it disappeared," the man muttered. "It did," I stammered. "I swear it did." He slowly reached under the counter and pulled out a rusty-looking revolver. "Stay here," he said, pushing through the door and walking out onto the lot. I followed a few steps behind him, heart pounding in my ears. As we got closer, the lights turned off again, just like before. He shouted, "Whoever you are, get the hell out of here." Nothing. No doors opened, no engine sound, nothing. He walked right up to the driver's side and rapped on the window with the butt of the revolver. Still nothing. Then he opened the door. It was empty. No one inside. No keys in the ignition. No sound. Just an old, dusty interior that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But it was running. He looked back at me. "Get back inside." We went in, locked the door, and he pulled the blinds down. I didn't say a word. I just stood there staring at the back wall of the shop while he stood watching the lot with the gun resting on the counter. We waited. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Finally, the headlights turned on again, without anyone getting in. The car reversed slowly, then turned and pulled back onto the highway. We stood there until we couldn't see the lights anymore. "That," the man said finally, "wasn't normal." "No kidding," I said, voice barely above a whisper. I ended up staying there until dawn. He let me sleep in a back room behind the snack shelves, and every hour or so, he'd poke his head in to check on me. I asked him if he'd ever seen it before, and he said once, back in '92. A couple came through and told a similar story. They didn't stop, just kept driving. They were found wrecked off the highway 5 miles east. No other car involved, no sign of what made them veer off. I left at first light. I took a different route home, even though it added 3 hours to the trip. I just couldn't make myself get back on that stretch of I-10. Weeks went by. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. I figured people would think I imagined it, that it was just exhaustion or nerves. But then, last week, a buddy of mine, Nathan, said he was planning a solo trip out west to photograph abandoned towns at night. He asked if I'd ever driven through McCamey and that part of I-10. I paused, then asked him why. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture he took on the road a few nights earlier. A blurry, distant image of a white light pair of headlights far behind his car. He said it followed him for 40 minutes. When he pulled over, it disappeared. I didn't know what to say. I just looked at the photo and felt that same cold grip on my spine that I'd felt months before. Whatever's out there, it doesn't go away. Story the end. The night was thick with silence, heavier than usual, as I pulled my old sedan onto the lonely stretch of Highway 101 just outside of Eugene, Oregon. It was nearly 2 a.m., and I was heading back home after visiting a friend in a small town nestled deep in the Willamette Valley. The plan was simple. Drive straight home through the dark, winding roads, keep my eyes on the road, and not think too much about the shadows lurking beyond my headlights. I had taken this route dozens of times, mostly during the day. The highway cut through miles of dense forest, tall evergreens towering on either side like silent sentinels. The asphalt was cracked in places, and occasional patches of fog drifted low over the pavement. Tonight, however, the air felt thicker, almost suffocating. For the first hour, everything was normal enough. The hum of my engine and the rhythmic thud of tires on pavement filled the cabin. My radio played softly, but static often overwhelmed the signal as I passed through remote areas. I rolled the windows down a bit, the cool night air rushing in and mixing with the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Around the 70-mile mark, as I passed the tiny community of Dexter, I noticed a set of headlights flickering in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was a car catching up, maybe a local heading home. But as the minutes ticked by, the headlights stayed locked behind me, never overtaking, never falling behind, just following. I tried to ignore it, probably another late-night driver or someone bored on the road. But the more I glanced back, the more the headlights seemed to stay unnervingly close. About 10 miles later, I spotted a small turnout, a gravel patch big enough for 1 or 2 cars to pull over. Heart pounding, I eased my car onto it and slowed to a stop, hoping whoever was behind me would pass. I waited, engine idling, eyes scanning the dark. But the headlights didn't pass. Instead, they slowed, then stopped a few yards behind me, just sitting there in the black. I looked in the mirror. The windows were tinted dark, and I couldn't see the driver's face. The vehicle was a large black SUV, no license plates visible. The quiet was oppressive. I reached for my phone, but no signal. Typical for this stretch. A sense of dread settled deep in my chest. Suddenly, the SUV's headlights flickered off entirely, plunging the road behind me into total darkness. My breath caught. I was alone now, at least visually. Seconds passed like minutes. Then the lights snapped back on. The SUV inched forward a few feet, then stopped again. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I considered driving forward, but my heart wouldn't let me. Then, from the passenger side window of the SUV, a pale hand appeared, slowly reaching out into the cold air, fingers twitching like a spider's. I swallowed hard, pressed the gas, and sped back onto the road. As I accelerated, the SUV mirrored my speed, still close behind, its presence unrelenting. Up ahead, the road curved sharply near the edge of a small lake, Clearwater Reservoir. The fog was thickening, drifting over the water and creeping onto the pavement. As I navigated the curve, I spotted something on the road ahead. A woman, standing motionless, her white dress fluttering in the mist. Her face was obscured by long, wet hair, her posture strange and unnatural. I slammed the brakes, but it was too late. The car skidded to a halt just feet from her. I yelled, "Hey, are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly lifted her head, revealing eyes as black as the night itself. I felt an icy chill grip me as she let out a scream, a soundless scream that echoed in my mind. Suddenly, she vanished. The SUV's headlights blasted past me, roaring away into the fog. I sat frozen, heart hammering, before finally gathering enough courage to drive the last few miles home. The next morning, I found scratches along the passenger door and muddy footprints on the rear bumper. I haven't taken that route at night since. Story, the end. It was a little past 11:30 p.m. when David pulled out of the gas station just outside a small town in West Texas. His tank was full, his phone was charged, and his GPS showed a straight, desolate route stretching across a vast patch of nothing toward El Paso. He had done drives like this before, cross-country hauling in his mid-sized van for his job as a freelance courier. Usually he liked the solitude, the clean air, the monotony of headlights and long roads. But that night felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind cut across the desert like something was chasing it, or maybe it was how the gas station attendant had paused when David told him where he was headed. "Stay on the highway. Don't take the service roads, the man had said without smiling. And if you see someone walking out there, don't stop. David had chuckled at the time. Someone walking? Out here? The man's face didn't change. Just don't. Back on the road, that moment stuck with him more than he expected. He adjusted the dial on the radio, finding nothing but static and a half-working country station. The road was black and long, with no other cars in sight. The sky was vast and empty, a few dying stars barely visible through the rolling clouds. He tried to shake the weird tension building in his chest. Around midnight, about 40 miles from the last sign of civilization, David saw the first figure. He blinked, slowed the van slightly, and squinted. A man was walking along the shoulder, facing away from him, wearing what looked like a white hoodie and jeans. His hands hung strangely stiff at his sides. No car in sight, just him and the dark. David slowed more, instinctively rolling down the window. "Hey, you okay?" he shouted. The man didn't respond. He just kept walking. David's voice rose. "You need help?" Still nothing. The wind rustled in the creosote brush off the road. The man kept walking at a steady pace, not turning his head, not slowing. David crept along beside him for another few seconds before getting a chill up his spine. Something about the way the guy moved wasn't right. He rolled up the window and picked up speed, telling himself it was smarter not to mess with people at night, especially in the middle of nowhere. Maybe the guy was drunk, or high, or dangerous. He shook it off and kept driving. 15 minutes later, David saw another person. This time it was a woman, standing still on the side of the road, facing the desert. Her long hair fluttered in the wind. She wore a pale dress that looked old-fashioned, like something from a different era. He passed her slowly, expecting her to turn toward his headlights, to look at him. She didn't move. David's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He didn't stop. The road began to feel less familiar, even though the GPS showed he was on course. He'd driven parts of this route before, but nothing looked the same. The terrain was flat and dead, just cactus, sand, and the occasional scrubby bush. But it had a dreamlike haze to it now, as if it were repeating itself. The same formation of rocks, the same sloping hill, the same rusted-out barbed wire fence. He checked the clock. 12:29 a.m. His eyes burned and he blinked hard. The van's headlights caught another figure, standing dead center in the road. David slammed the brakes. The figure didn't flinch, just stood there, tall and unmoving, wearing what looked like a black coat or robe. David's headlights illuminated part of the person's face. It was pale and wrinkled, like it had been stretched too tight over the bones. He shouted from inside the van, "Move! Get out of the road!" Nothing. The wind stopped suddenly. David honked. The figure didn't move, but it raised one hand slowly, a long-fingered gesture as if waving him forward, or warning him back. David reversed hard and veered around the figure, heart hammering in his chest. He looked back in the mirror, but the figure was gone. Gone. He pressed down on the gas and sped up, fighting the rising panic. The GPS started to glitch. The map spun, recalculated, jumped around, no service. The screen dimmed and flickered before showing nothing but a loading symbol. That was when David realized how dark the desert had become. Even his headlights seemed weaker, barely cutting through the inky black. His ears popped, like the air pressure was changing. Then came the hum. It started low, barely audible, but gradually grew into a throbbing sound, like machinery deep underground, pulsing beneath his tires. David turned off the radio. The hum continued. He pulled over, heart racing, and shut off the engine. Silence. The hum faded. David opened the door slowly and stepped out. The air was heavy, thick. The desert was deathly still. No crickets, no wind. He stared at the road behind him, empty in both directions. Then he looked up. No stars. The sky was completely black, not just cloudy. Pitch black, like something had painted over it. Then he saw it. Not far from the road, maybe 30 feet out into the desert brush, a faint red light hovered above the ground. It wasn't a fire. It wasn't a car. It was like a small orb, floating silently. David knew better than to investigate. He climbed back into the van, locked the doors, and started the engine. Nothing happened. The van was dead. Panic clawed at his throat. He turned the key again. Click. Nothing. Not even dashboard lights. He grabbed his phone. No signal. Battery still full. He held it up to try for reception, but it didn't matter. Then he saw movement in the rearview mirror. A shape moved behind the van, fast and low to the ground. He turned to look, heart pounding. Nothing. Another movement, this time closer, near the passenger side. David froze. Then, a soft tap on the passenger window. He turned slowly. A face stared in at him, chalk white, eyes too wide, lips barely moving. The tapping continued, but the figure didn't blink. David screamed and dove to the driver's side, fumbling for something, anything to defend himself. He grabbed his tire iron from the floor and looked back. The window was empty. No one there. He unlocked the door, swung it open, and ran into the desert. The red light pulsed in the distance, and he ran the opposite direction, heart jackhammering in his chest. He didn't know where he was going, just away. After maybe 100 yards, he stopped, panting, and turned. His van was gone. Not just the figure, his entire van. The road was there, but nothing else, as if he'd never driven it. David fell to his knees, breath catching in his throat. He looked up again, and the sky was full of stars. Everything had returned to normal. He staggered back toward where the road had been, trembling, scanning for anything familiar. After walking for what felt like hours, he finally saw headlights in the distance. A pair of headlights coming toward him. David waved his arms, stumbling toward the light. A pickup truck slowed and stopped. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap leaned out the window. "You all right, buddy?" David couldn't form words. He just nodded, then shook his head, then finally croaked out, "My van, it was there. Then it wasn't." The man squinted. "You walking out here by yourself? That's not smart. This stretch of desert's weird at night." David climbed into the truck, too weak to argue. As they drove, the man said, "People see things out here. Things that don't belong. Happens every so often. You must have pulled off onto that old military road." David stared at him. "What military road?" The man pointed ahead. "There's a turnoff you probably took. It ain't on any map, not anymore. Was part of a testing area back in the 50s. Government never cleaned it up right. Folks say reality's thin out there, like it overlaps with something else." David sat in silence, the hum from earlier still echoing faintly in his ears. They reached a roadside diner about 40 miles down. The man dropped David off, and the waitress there let him use the landline to call a tow service. When the driver arrived 2 hours later and took David back to where he thought the van had been, there was nothing. No tire marks, no vehicle, just sand and rocks. The sheriff's office got involved. They searched, questioned, ran records. 3 days later, the van was found, abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Arizona. Doors locked, keys missing. No sign of damage. The odometer showed 186 extra miles, no fingerprints inside, no trace of David ever being in it. He left Texas that week and never went back. Never drove at night again, either. Whatever was out there in that part of the desert, whatever watched him, stalked him, whispered to him, it hadn't just been the dark. It had been something deeper, something older, and it wasn't done with him. Some nights, when the power flickers in his apartment and the shadows lengthen in the hallway, he hears that low hum again, just beneath the noise of everyday life. A reminder. Story the end. It was nearly midnight when Josh left the small-town diner off I-90 in Montana. He'd stopped for a coffee and a quick bite after hours of driving alone. The place had been almost empty, save for an older man at the counter and a waitress who looked like she was more interested in her phone than her customers. He didn't blame her. It was the kind of place people only stopped at when there were no other options. He had maybe 6 more hours of driving to reach Spokane, and he figured if he stayed alert, he could make it before sunrise. His 2012 Toyota Tacoma was gassed up and running fine. Josh had been doing a long-haul trip from Minneapolis to Seattle, moving for a new job. He had most of his life packed into boxes in the back seat and truck bed. A friend had warned him about the desolate stretches of road in Montana, especially at night. "Don't fall asleep, and don't stop for anyone," his buddy had told him. Josh had laughed at the time, but now, staring out at the empty road ahead, he could see the seriousness in that advice. The road was empty, so empty it almost felt surreal. The darkness beyond his headlights was absolute, swallowing everything whole. His high beams illuminated only what was directly in front of him: pavement, faded lane markings, and the occasional sign warning about deer crossings. No streetlights, no other cars, and no buildings. Just miles and miles of empty highway, bordered by dense forest and open plains. Around 1:15 a.m., he passed a small hand-painted sign nailed to a post. It read Red Pines 3 miles, with an arrow pointing down a narrow dirt road that branched off to the right. The name didn't ring any bells. He kept going. A few minutes later, he saw a figure on the shoulder of the road. At first, it didn't register. He thought it might have been a sign or even a tree stump, but as he passed, he realized it was a person. A woman, dressed in what looked like a torn dress or nightgown. She had long, tangled hair that fell over her face, and she didn't turn or wave. She just stood there, completely still, facing the road. Josh's heart jumped. He glanced in his rearview mirror but couldn't see her anymore. He slowed down slightly, thinking maybe he should turn around and check if she needed help. But something about her posture, her stillness, didn't sit right. There was no car nearby, no suitcase or bag, nothing that suggested she had broken down or gotten lost. He decided to keep driving. About 10 minutes later, as he was starting to shake off the weird feeling, his truck began to slow. He hadn't touched the brakes. The engine was still on, but it felt like he was losing power. He pressed the gas pedal, but the truck coasted like it was in neutral. The dashboard lights flickered for a second, then stabilized. He guided the truck over to the shoulder and put it in park. It idled fine, but something felt off. He popped the hood and grabbed his flashlight. Outside, the air was cold and eerily silent, not even the sound of crickets. He opened the hood and shone the light inside. Nothing seemed out of place. No smoke, no weird smells. Belts were intact, fluid levels looked good. He shut the hood, annoyed and confused. That's when he heard it, a soft rustling like footsteps through dry grass, coming from behind the truck. He turned fast, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing, just the road disappearing into the horizon and the endless shadows of the trees. He climbed back in the truck and locked the doors. He tried driving again, and this time the truck responded. Smooth acceleration, no issue at all. Maybe it had been a weird glitch. He chalked it up to fatigue and got back on the road, hands gripping the wheel tighter than before. Another hour passed, and he started seeing fog ahead, just a low-lying mist clinging to the ground. His headlights turned it into a wall of white. He slowed down and turned on his fog lights. The fog grew thicker, like it was being poured onto the road. That's when he saw her again, standing in the middle of the road. This time, she was facing him. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching as he skidded to a stop just a few feet in front of her. She didn't move. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes looked wrong. They were too wide, too dark, like bottomless pits. Her mouth hung slightly open, and her arms dangled limply at her sides. Josh fumbled for the gear shift, threw it in reverse, and backed up several yards. He honked his horn once, twice. She didn't flinch. He grabbed his phone and tried to call 911, but there was no signal. No bars, no service, just the little X in the top corner. He watched her, waiting for her to move, to step aside to speak. But she just stood there, locked eyes with him through the windshield, and then she disappeared, not walked away, not ran off. 1 second she was there, and the next, nothing. Just fog. Josh sat frozen for a few moments, pulse hammering in his ears. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he was hallucinating. He even got out of the truck to check, shining his flashlight around, half expecting her to pop out from the fog. But the road was empty. He got back in and started driving again, this time barely going 30 miles per hour. For the next 2 hours, it was like he'd driven into another world. The road signs vanished, the mile markers disappeared, and even the stars overhead were gone. Just gray fog, pitch-black tree lines, and an oppressive sense of being watched. His headlights began to flicker occasionally. The radio turned itself on even though he hadn't touched it. Static, just pure static. No station number, just a low, garbled hum like a voice trying to speak through water. And once clear as day he heard his name. Josh. He shut off the radio immediately. He reached for his phone again. Still no signal. Then the temperature dropped. Rapidly. The windows frosted over on the inside. He turned on the defroster, but it barely helped. He could see his breath in the cabin. Suddenly, a loud thud hit the roof of the truck. Then another, and another, like someone was crawling across the top. Josh floored it, speeding blindly into the fog, heart racing, knuckles white on the wheel. The banging continued, now at the rear window, then the passenger side. He didn't dare look. He focused straight ahead, praying the fog would lift. And it did, abruptly. He burst out of the fog like coming out of a tunnel, and just like that, the normal world returned. Stars above, clear road, temperature back to normal. His dashboard lights stopped flickering, and the static on the radio vanished. He looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. His phone buzzed with signal again. 4 bars. It was 4:03 a.m. He pulled into the next rest stop he could find, which came up only 10 minutes later. It was empty except for one RV parked at the far end. He parked under a streetlight and sat there for a long time, engine running, doors locked. He checked the roof in the morning. There were scratches, long, thin scratches, not deep, but enough to be visible, running from the front to the back. He didn't tell anyone when he reached Spokane. Not his parents, not his friends. He even questioned it himself, wondered if the isolation and fatigue had messed with his head. But 3 nights later, as he was unpacking in his new apartment, he found something in the back seat. A single strand of long, dark hair draped across the top of a sealed moving box. He didn't own a pet. He lived alone. Story the end. It was around 11:45 p.m. when I finally left my buddy's house just outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina. I had stayed longer than I meant to, mostly because we got caught up talking about some dumb high school memories and lost track of time. My plan had been to head out by 9, maybe 10, but now I had a 2.5-hour drive ahead of me, and I was already exhausted. The road from Fayetteville back to my apartment in Winston-Salem wasn't too bad, at least during the day. At night, though, it got quiet. Too quiet. Once you got past the stretch of I-95, it was mostly dark highways and rural backroads. I had driven that route dozens of times before, but for some reason that night felt different. I didn't think much of it at first. I had my music on low, my windows cracked a little for fresh air. The night was warm but not humid. There was no traffic, which made for smooth driving, but there was also a certain uneasiness that crept in the farther I got from town. It was that eerie emptiness that makes you hyper-aware of your surroundings. I got off I-95 and hit Highway 87 North, which eventually turns into rural 2-lane roads that snake through thick patches of pine forest. There are long stretches without any cell service. It's not uncommon to go 20 or 30 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. Somewhere around an hour into the drive, I started noticing something weird with the headlights behind me. A truck had pulled out maybe a mile back. Nothing unusual. But every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, it looked like it was gaining on me, then falling back again. Not a little either. One moment it was almost on my bumper. The next it was way in the distance, barely visible. At first, I chalked it up to curves in the road and my tired eyes playing tricks. But then I realized something strange. The truck never passed me. It had more than enough chances. There were several stretches where it could have overtaken me, especially since I wasn't speeding. But it just lingered, creeping up, then fading back. I slowed down, figuring I'd let the truck pass, but it slowed too. Every time I tried to shake it, it adjusted to my speed. That's when the anxiety really kicked in. I turned off the music and rolled the windows all the way up. I even considered pulling over, but there were no gas stations or rest stops nearby, just empty road and dense woods pressing in on either side. Then, without warning, the truck's headlights shut off completely. 1 second, bright beams glaring in my mirrors. The next, total darkness behind me. I gripped the wheel tighter, my pulse pounding in my ears. I kept glancing in the mirror, hoping to see those lights again, but they didn't come back. My brain raced through possibilities. Maybe they pulled over. Maybe they took an exit I didn't notice. Maybe they just turned off their lights for some reason. But it didn't sit right. Not at all. I was so distracted by the absence of the lights that I barely noticed when I passed a small hand-painted wooden sign nailed to a post. I couldn't make out what it said, just a white arrow pointing right. The GPS didn't mention any turns, but suddenly my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen flashed, rerouting. No signal. I looked back at the road and realized the car was slowly veering toward that right turn, almost like muscle memory or instinct had taken over. I hit the brakes. Hard. The car skidded slightly on the loose gravel and stopped just before the turn. There was nothing but darkness down that road. No streetlights, no reflectors, not even the moonlight reaching through the canopy of trees. Just a yawning black corridor. Something inside me told me not to take it. Everything screamed, "Don't." I backed up carefully and got back on the main road. As soon as I did, the GPS corrected itself like nothing had happened and the signal came back. That's when I realized something else. My phone clock had jumped forward. It now read 1:38 a.m. That didn't make sense. By my memory, I had only been on the road an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes tops. I hadn't stopped. There was no traffic to slow me down, and I sure as hell hadn't lost an entire hour. I was wide awake now. Every tree and shadow seemed to bend in my peripheral vision. Every little roadside reflector looked like eyes. I tried to focus on just getting home. Another 10 miles in, I saw headlights ahead. Not coming toward me, parked. A car was pulled onto the shoulder. As I got closer, I realized it was a black SUV with its hazard lights on. The driver's door was open, but no one was inside or around it. At this point, I should have called someone, but I didn't want to stop. Everything in me said to keep going. As I passed the SUV, I slowed a little, just to peek inside. The driver's seat was empty, but there was something smeared on the inside of the window. I couldn't tell what, maybe dirt or condensation. But then I saw it, a handprint, on the inside. That was it. I floored it. My tiredness was long gone, replaced by sheer adrenaline. I needed to get the hell off that road. I was only about 45 minutes from home at that point, so I figured I'd just push through. For a while, nothing happened. No other cars, no strange lights. I almost let myself believe I had imagined it all, until the fog rolled in. Out of nowhere, the road ahead was swallowed by thick white mist. Not like the light, wispy kind that drifts around in fields. This was dense, like something you'd see in a horror movie. My high beams just bounced off it, blinding me. I slowed to a crawl, maybe 15 miles an hour. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing in the middle of the road. She was barefoot, wearing what looked like a long, white nightgown, her hair hanging wet and stringy over her face. I slammed the brakes so hard I thought I'd snap the seatbelt. The car screeched to a halt just feet in front of her. She didn't move. I honked. Nothing. I rolled the window down just a crack and shouted, "Hey, are you okay?" Still nothing. That's when she looked up. Her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just black pits. Her mouth opened like she was screaming, but there was no sound. Then she vanished. Not ran, not faded. Vanished. 1 second she was there. The next, empty road. I was frozen, my hands locked on the wheel, my heart thundering in my chest. I didn't want to drive forward, afraid I'd hit something or someone that was still there, unseen. But I didn't want to stay either. I eased forward. The fog began to lift just as quickly as it had appeared. In another half mile, it was completely gone, and the road was clear again. I looked back. Nothing. No sign of the woman, no trace of the fog. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot around 2:30, I didn't even bother bringing in my overnight bag. I just got inside, locked the door, and sat in the living room with all the lights on until the sun came up. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I thought maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel and imagined it. But the thing that sticks with me most, and still does, is what I found the next morning when I finally went back out to the car. There was a handprint on the driver's side window, pressed from inside. The car had been locked all night. I don't drive that route anymore. I take the longer way through Greensboro, even if it adds an hour. Whatever happened that night wasn't just in my head. I don't care if people don't believe me. Something was out there on that road, and I don't ever want to see it again. Story the end. It was past midnight when Mark Caldwell left the warehouse in Bakersfield. He had picked up an extra shift delivering hardware supplies to a site up north. The company was short on drivers, and he needed the extra pay. His wife, Amy, was asleep when he left, curled under a quilt with their infant son in the crib next to her. He kissed her forehead before stepping out into the humid Central California night. Mark had made the drive north on Highway 99 dozens of times. Tonight's destination was a little off the beaten path, somewhere near Lake Isabella. It wasn't a long drive in daylight, but nighttime out there had a way of stretching itself out. There were fewer streetlights, fewer gas stations, and an eerie silence that crept into the cab of the truck, even with the radio on. The delivery was scheduled for early morning, so Mark figured he'd drive slow, listen to some podcasts, and sip on the large coffee he'd grabbed on his way out. The first hour passed uneventfully. Traffic dwindled the further he got from town. Eventually, the four-lane highway narrowed to two, winding along the hills in Kern County with no headlights ahead or behind. His route veered onto Sierra Way, a twisting road with tight curves. He checked his GPS again. According to the address, the construction site was a temporary job off a service road, about 12 miles up. The GPS signal flickered in and out, something Mark was used to in these parts. Still, he had marked the turnoff earlier in the day on Google Maps and was confident he'd find it. As the truck dipped into a valley between two ridgelines, Mark's high beams caught something in the road ahead. At first, it looked like a deer, but it wasn't. It was a woman. She was standing perfectly still in the right lane, facing him, arms hanging limp by her sides. Her hair was long, soaked, hanging like wet moss down her shoulders. She wore what looked like a nightgown, dirt-stained and torn. Her face was hard to make out, washed out in the glare of the headlights. Mark jerked the wheel and veered to the left, tires screeching as the box truck swerved into the oncoming lane. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The truck fishtailed slightly before stopping. He threw it into park and stared into the rear view, expecting to see her silhouette walking toward him. But the road behind was empty. He grabbed the flashlight from the passenger seat and stepped out. The air was cold suddenly, sharp and damp, though it hadn't rained. He scanned the road behind him. Nothing. No woman. Not even footprints. The fog of his breath swirled in front of him. Mark stayed still for a few seconds, listening. The night was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the low hum of the truck's idling engine and the slow tick of the hazard lights. He returned to the cab and locked the doors, glancing nervously at the side mirrors. His hands were still shaking. Maybe she was hallucination, he muttered, trying to rationalize it. He'd been sleep-deprived, overworked lately. Maybe it was stress. He kept driving. 10 minutes later, the GPS cut out completely. The service road was supposed to be closed. His headlights illuminated an old rusted sign on the right, partially obscured by overgrown weeds. The paint had nearly worn off, but he could make out the word Miller. That was the name of the road on the delivery instructions. He slowed and turned off. The service road was narrow, one lane, dirt-packed and uneven. Mark cursed under his breath as the truck jolted with each rut and pothole. Trees pressed in tightly on either side. His headlights barely reached beyond the next turn. After about 2 miles, he found the clearing. According to the job sheet, this was the site where a mobile construction crew was setting up foundations for a small residential project. But the lot was empty. No trailers, no portable toilets, no cones or equipment, just gravel and dirt surrounded by trees. He double-checked the sheet. The address matched. Maybe they haven't arrived yet, he said aloud, but it didn't make sense. The job was scheduled for weeks, and supplies had already been dropped here before. Mark stepped out to take a picture of the empty site to send to dispatch. As soon as he did, a noise came from the woods, something between a whisper and a rustling. It wasn't wind. He froze. Another sound, closer this time, a soft, dragging step. Then, from the corner of his eye, something white flickered between the trees. He spun around with his flashlight. Nothing. Then he saw her again. She was standing about 15 feet away, half shrouded behind a pine, staring at him. Her skin looked grayish in the flashlight's beam, and her eyes seemed too wide, too dark. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Mark backed toward the truck. "Hey," he called. "You okay?" No answer. His voice cracked. "You need help?" Still, she didn't move. He reached the driver's side door and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. She remained in place for a few seconds, then took a step forward. Mark threw the truck into reverse, tires kicking up gravel as he backed toward the road. He didn't look away from her. She took another step, her head tilted, almost curious, like a bird inspecting something wounded. Once he hit the tree line, he turned hard onto the service road, scraping the bumper on a rock. The truck bounced violently as he sped back toward the highway, glancing in the mirrors every few seconds. No one followed him. Back on the main road, Mark kept going north. He didn't stop. Not until he saw the lights of a 24-hour diner about 20 miles ahead, just outside a small town. He pulled into the lot, parked crooked, and stumbled inside, white-faced and soaked in sweat. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Carol, took one look at him and poured a coffee without asking. "You okay, honey?" she asked. Mark nodded slowly, just tired. Real tired. He sat in the corner booth, nursing the cup with trembling fingers. Another customer, a trucker with a bushy gray beard, sat a few stools down and looked over. "You see her?" the trucker asked, voice low. Mark looked up. "What?" "The girl in white, by the trees." Mark's mouth went dry. "You've seen her?" "About 10 years ago, just off Sierra Way. Nearly crashed trying to avoid her. Locals say she walks that road, wrecked out there, car went off the cliff. They never found her body." Mark stared. "Real or not, people say when you see her, something bad follows. Real bad." Mark left the diner after 2 more cups of coffee. The rest of the route took him back down toward the main delivery depot. He had to reroute since the site had no crew. Dispatch didn't believe his explanation, but told him to return, and they'd sort it in the morning. The sun had started to rise when he reached the outskirts of Bakersfield. Traffic picked up. The world felt normal again, until he pulled into his driveway. His front door was wide open. Mark's heart dropped. He rushed inside. Amy was on the floor, crying. The baby was screaming in the other room. She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Someone was in the house," she sobbed. I woke up and saw a woman standing at the foot of the bed. She didn't say anything, just stared at me. Then she disappeared. Mark's knees buckled, and he collapsed next to her. He didn't tell her what he'd seen. Not Day. Not ever. They moved 2 weeks later. He quit driving night shifts. Mark never saw the girl again, but for the rest of his life he swore he felt her watching whenever he drove after dark, just beyond the tree line, waiting. Story the end. The night was cold, crisp, and clear when I started my drive home from my late shift at the factory. It was around 1 a.m., and the streets were practically deserted. I had about 100 miles to cover on Route 29, heading from Greensboro down toward Charlotte. Normally, I didn't mind these night drives. They were peaceful, sometimes even calming. But that night, something felt off from the start. I'd been driving for about 30 minutes when I hit a long stretch of road surrounded by dense woods on both sides. The kind of place where the trees lean in close enough to blot out the stars and make the road feel like a tunnel. My headlights cut through the darkness in front of me, reflecting off the cracked pavement. No other cars were in sight. I turned the radio on low to keep myself awake, but at every song felt like background noise against the silence pressing in. The first strange thing happened when I noticed a pair of headlights behind me. At first, I thought it was just another car catching up on the empty road, but then it didn't pass. It just stayed behind me at the same distance. No flashing high beams, no honking, nothing. Just a car tailing me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver. The windshield was too dark, but I could tell the car was an older model, a beat-up sedan, something that looked place in 2025. I turned on my right blinker to switch lanes and let it pass. The car followed my move, staying right behind me. I sped up to 65 miles per hour. The car matched me. I swallowed hard and turned the radio off so I could listen better. The hum of the tires on the asphalt felt louder. The only thing missing was the sound of the other car's engine. I flicked the high beams on for a second to get a better look in the mirror. That's when I noticed the headlights weren't on. The car behind me was following with no lights on at all. My heart jumped. I slowed down to 50 miles per hour, hoping the driver would turn off, but the car stayed right there. Engine silent, headlights dark. It was like something out of a nightmare. I took a deep breath and looked over my shoulder. The road behind was empty. No sign of that car. My blood ran cold. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. I shook my head and tried to focus on the road ahead. The trees pressed in closer as the highway narrowed. I passed an old rusty sign that read, "Welcome to Anson County." No street lights, just the road, the woods, and the creeping silence. Then about 2 miles down, I saw something at the edge of the road, a figure standing in the woods, half hidden by the shadows. At first, I thought it was a deer or some kind of animal, but as I drew closer, I saw it was a man. He stood perfectly still, wearing what looked like a dirty gray coat. His face was hard to make out in the darkness, but his posture was tense, almost like he was waiting for me. I instinctively slowed down. The man stepped onto the shoulder and then the road itself. My stomach knotted. I hit the brakes, slowing down to a crawl. He didn't move out of the way. I reached for the horn and honked, trying to scare him off the road. No reaction. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. That dark car was back. No lights, no engine sound, just a shadow following me. I swerved slightly to avoid the man, but he raised one hand. A finger pointed at me. I slammed my foot down on the gas, heart pounding, tires screeching. As I sped past, the man didn't move. His face was suddenly clear under the headlights. A pale, gaunt face, with hollow eyes that stared right through me. His mouth was slightly open, frozen in an expression of silent terror. I glanced into the mirror again. The figure was still there, now joined by two more, standing further back in the trees, their faces twisted in agony. I clenched the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The radio suddenly crackled to life with static, then a whisper, faint but clear. "Don't stop." I slammed the off button. The whispering stopped. My hands trembled as I forced myself to keep driving. The next stretch of road was rough and winding. The trees leaned over the highway, branches scratching at the roof of my car. The darkness seemed to thicken. About 15 miles later, I hit a long, abandoned stretch where the pavement cracked and weeds grew through the lines. I passed a rusted sign, "Dead End, Private Property." It looked out of place, but there was no alternate route. The dark car was still behind me, its shadow blending with the night. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to get off that cursed road. Then my car's engine died. Total silence, except the faint sound of breathing, heavy and slow. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. In the rearview mirror, the dark car pulled up alongside me, moving in eerie silence. I rolled down my window a crack, the cold air rushing in. I thought I heard footsteps. A hand touched the side of my car. I yanked the window closed. The whispering started again, all around me, like a chorus of voices in the woods. "Don't stop, don't stop." I slammed the hazard lights on and tried the ignition again. The engine sputtered, then roared back to life. I floored it, tires spinning as I tore down the road. Behind me, the dark car didn't follow. I didn't look back. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled over at a gas station. The man behind the counter looked tired and worn. I told him about the dark car, the figures on the road, the whispering voices. He looked at me like I was crazy. "There's an old stretch of highway out that way," he said. "People call it the Hollow Road. It's been closed off for decades. But sometimes people still end up there, especially at night. They say the spirits of those who died on the road still haunt it. They're trapped, looking for company. They don't want you to stop, or else." I never drove that way again. Sometimes I wonder if I was lucky to get out, or if I was never really out at all. Story the end.